Beautiful, man. Should we just rip right into it? What do you think?
Let's rip.
Let's rip. So how's morale? Are you posting up in Colorado at the moment?
Yeah, I am in Colorado. I'm in a tiny little town called Crestone, Colorado, which is like a slice of Tibet that got dropped into the Rocky Mountains.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, a bunch of Buddhist monasteries here and stupas, and we're at 8,000 feet, just under 14,000 foot range. It's awesome. It's really nice.
Beautiful. Yeah, I got a bunch of family out there. My cousins moved out there a few years ago, and they're cute little weirdo stoners, and we always have a good time. So I'll go out there whenever I need a morale boost or I'm feeling weird socially. I get a great reset. Go visit my little cousins and restart in Colorado.
Yeah, it's good. Everyone should have weirdo cousins.
Do you feel like everyone is a weirdo, like at heart? It's just so many people it's just been like kind of like suppressed down in there somewhere, but they want to find it maybe?
Yeah. I mean, what's that famous quote that we're all born individuals and we die copies, you know? I think there's some truth to that the sort of trajectory of the educational system and society in the United States, certainly, and I think most societies, is to iron out the uniqueness of individuals and sort of standardize, get us all standardized, one size fits all. So, yeah.
Was that an accident, do you think, or is that on purpose? Is there anyone in the control tower of higher education?
Well, higher education was designed not higher education. Education.
Education.
Public education. Yeah.
Public education.
Was literally designed to train people who had grown up on farms to learn to work in factories. So, and this was 100 years ago or so, but you can still see it, the bells, the ringing of the bells, everyone moves at certain times and doesn't move other times. You don't go anywhere without permission. You need a hall pass. You need this. You're breaking up into groups, and these groups do things in, tandem. I mean, all that was to get people who have grown up on farms who, work by the sun, accustomed to working by the clock.
Wow. Okay.
And, respect for authority. You do something because you're told to do it. We don't pay you to think. You just sit down and stop talking and do what you're told.
Oh, yeah. I remember those
for
days.
Factory. So, I mean, it's intentional in that sense that it's definitely a training ground for capitalism, Unfortunately, people aren't, or fortunately, it depends how you look at it, people aren't getting jobs in factories anymore, but we're still training them to work in factories. So it's kind of fucked up.
Right. Yeah, I'll never forget. I mean, that feeling and that sound of that school bell in my ear, I still hear it to this day. And, it's like half the time you fear that sound because you're going to class. You have to be in there. If you don't get there in time, you have a detention. Maybe kids make fun of you. You lose your scene cred. Or on the other end, it's like you're just counting down the minutes, watching the clock, praying for the bell to ring, and it's a weird love-hate relationship with the school bell.
Yeah, school. Yeah.
What was your kind of high school life like? Was that something that worked out? Was it cool for you? I had a tough time, but some people really loved it.
No, I went to 3 different high schools in 4 years. So most of my high school career was about adjusting to a new town and new people. And so I was perennially the new kid, sort of, eating lunch by myself at the lunch table with no friends. And, sort of that kind of, I mean, that was the scene. I mean, the first school I went to freshman year, I had friends because I lived there for a few years. Then I moved in the summer between freshman and sophomore year to Connecticut. I was there for 2.5 years. And I mean, I shouldn't complain because actually there were really nice kids who took me in and, the period of being the lonely loser didn't last very long. And then halfway through my senior year, I moved to a small town in upstate New York. And that really changed my life because essentially what happened was I was going to the middle 2 years, I was in Fairfield, Connecticut in this big school, really smart kids, smart teachers. There are a few thousand students there, and very high kind of academic standards. Yeah. And then halfway through my senior year, I was already accepted in college. Like I was done with high school, and I moved to this little town in upstate New York. And it was a fiasco because suddenly I was going into this tiny school with about 50 kids, I think, in my class, and very low academic standards. And I was already accepted in college. So I was like, I don't really need anything from you.
Yeah, right.
And your threats mean nothing to me because I don't give a shit. And my parents were like, yeah, just leave him alone. Let him do what he wants. And they were like, no, you got to follow this rule and that rule. So I, like the last 3 months of high school, I mean, it was the whole thing. I made a teacher cry, and then they put me in school suspension. And then I sort of fomented rebellion in the in-school suspension room. And then they got me out of there. And then they decided they needed to separate me from all the other students because I was just like causing problems everywhere. So they decided to like isolate me. They wouldn't even let me go to lunch because they were afraid I'd like, foment rebellion at lunch. So this teacher brought me lunch every day. So the thing is, where they put me, the only place they wouldn't let me just not go to school. Like my dad was like, just let him not go. And they were like, no, he has to be here every day from, 8:45 to 2:30 or whatever it was. Even though they wouldn't let me go to classes, and I just had to go and be in the building. Yep. And the only place where they could keep me totally isolated was in the office of the head principal, who had quit a couple of months earlier. And that was the only empty room, I guess. So I spent the last, month or two of high school sitting at the principal's desk with my private bathroom and all these yearbooks stacked up in the corner, I remember. And one of my teachers, Dr. Ball, would bring me lunch every day, and we'd sit there and have lunch together. And the rest of the time, I just sat back with my feet on the desk and, read whatever I wanted to read and was happy as a pig in shit. And it was like, okay, this is what happens when you break the rules.
Put them in solitary. The whole high school public school system, to me, it was always such a great analogy to prison because we had all the different cliques, the goths and the hacky sackers and the punk kids. And some of them were nicer than others, and some of them kept to themselves more than others, and some of them like climbed for higher status, and then a new person would come in and get gobbled up by one clique, and the other clique would punch him in the kidneys in the hallway. It was pretty psychotic.
Shiv.
We used to punch each other in the kidneys as hard as we could as a prank. And I still have like hypochondria from that. Like I wake up feeling like a little weird to my stomach. I was like, I got permanent damage from getting punched in the kidneys in high school. And I've always been kind of a hypochondriac, but I feel like that maybe magnified it a lot. But you seem, one thing I wanted to ask you is you seem like being a hypochondriac would be far from your mindset. Has anxiety been something you've wrestled ever, or has that sort of not been a huge problem?
I think I'm a hypochondriac. Like my approach to health is ignore it, it'll go away, which tends to work most of the time, Anxiety is not a big issue in my life. And I think part of that is just sort of, I'd moved when I was a kid, so you could say, oh, that's traumatic in a way, but it worked out. And I was very unhappy when we left the town in Pennsylvania, for example. But then I quickly realized, like, wow, actually, I have much better friends here in Connecticut than I did in Pennsylvania. So it sucked to leave my friends, but this is better. And then when I left Connecticut halfway through and went to upstate New York to this little town, Cazenovia, I was like heartbroken. My girlfriend had broken up with me in Connecticut. I was like, oh, everything sucks. And then I got there and like the hottest chick in this school decided like I was the dude for her because I was raising all this hell with the teachers. And I was like a swashbuckling pirate or something. And everything got better. So I very early kind of realized like, don't assume that just because something feels uncomfortable that it's bad. It could very likely end up being an improvement. And, like you mentioned high school being like prison. I went to Alaska at my third year in college. I skipped my third year in college and I hitchhiked to Alaska and I ended up doing some stupid shit and I ended up in prison in Alaska. And the first thing I thought was like, visually it looks just like high school. The long hallways, nowhere to hide, long visual sight lines.
Announcements over the loudspeaker.
Yeah, dude. And then I said that to someone at some point and they're like, this guy was an architect and he's like, oh yeah, the same firms that make prisons make high schools. It's the same layout. Because it's all about control.
Jesus, that makes so much sense. Did you have any cool prison nicknames?
No, I wasn't there long enough to get any nicknames. I was there for 4 days, Memorial Day weekend, waiting for the judges to come back on Tuesday morning. I think I got busted Thursday evening, and I was finally out Tuesday morning.
Man, that would be so spooky. I feel like I would be toast, even in like 48 hours in a holding cell. Like I don't have any fighting skills. I don't look tough. I just feel like it'd be over for me.
Yeah, I didn't look tough either. My buddy and I were wearing shorts when we got arrested. So we showed up at prison in shorts with no underwear because we were doing our laundry. So we like took all our clothes and stuck them in the washing machines. And we were like, both of us had a jacket with no shirt, shorts with no underwear, and boots with no socks. This was in Fairbanks when we went to the grocery store and ended up eating some food that we hadn't paid for. And one thing led to another. And next thing you know, we're in this prison. And it's actually a prison too. It wasn't a holding cell. Because I don't know what it's like in Alaska now, but in 1983, I guess that was, they didn't have jails. They just had prisons. And so if they were holding you for trial or you picked up for drunk driving or something, you were in prison. So it was a medium security prison called Fairbanks Correctional Center.
I'm sure that changed you forever, You're like, well, can't fuck up too hard.
Well, it was one of these things that seemed like it was going to really, really suck and then ended up being a positive experience. Largely because the guy who, I want to say checked us in, but I don't think you check into prison. Like booked us.
Yep.
There we go. Here to check in, room for two,
the
please.
Agent.
the booking agent. Anyway, the guy who booked us, he saw the arrest, report, and he was like, "Are you fucking kidding me? They brought you in here for eating a Snickers bar?" And I was like, "Yeah." And also, I had some weed and a pipe and a knife, all of which were legal, but the cop didn't like any of it, and didn't like me, and I guess I mouthed off a little bit, and he wanted to teach us a lesson. So the guy who booked us was like, "Oh, this is bullshit." And I was like, "Yeah." And I had like, I don't know, 1/8 of an ounce of weed or something. And I said, "By the way, like, as far as I'm concerned, I don't expect to ever see that weed again." And he looked at me and he was like, okay.
Was he a stoner? Did he?
Yeah. Well, he was a black dude, in Alaska. I'm pretty sure he would have been a stoner.
Solid deal. It's cool
So
that
I was
you made an ally in there. I've always been so terrified of authority. Like I would like. It's so cool how you could handle yourself in there. I mean, even in high school, Chris, I had like, if I just knew like 4% of the knowledge I know now, I would know not to just live in fear all the time and be. Because my parents are amazing, and they taught me to respect elders at all times, no matter what, which I still agree with, but growing up it wasn't until I was like 20 years old that I realized like adults are also failures too. Like, cause I just assumed like every grown person like knew everything until I was like 20 years old. And it was kind of a big, holy shit moment, you know?
Yeah. Well, now that I'm an elder, I can tell you that, a lot of elders are full of shit. So, respect your elders. I think there's some wisdom in that, in respect the fact that people have been alive a lot longer than you, and just by having been alive that long, they probably know shit that you don't. But there are just as many people are full of shit at 60 as at 30. There's no
right. Do you see ageism in America as maybe not being as big of a thing in the future? Because I feel like this country has more ageism than anywhere on the planet.
I don't know. That's a good question. I do think ageism is a big deal here, much more than, I live most of my adult life in Spain, and it's definitely much more prominent here, like and not just ageism, but like age segregation, like
right.
In a typical cafe kind of bar in Spain, you'll see people of all ages. It doesn't occur to them that like this is just for older people and this is just for younger people. People tend to mix a lot more, which I think is a healthy thing in society. I see it, I see it a lot in sexuality, I think, which could just be because I see everything through the lens of sexuality. But, there's a lot, as a guy in his 50s, if I say anything the least bit erotic, there's a lot of like, what a creep. And,
sure.
There's a lot of rebellion against that. This sort of kind of prissy fundamentalist American freak out that happens all the time. Which I don't give a shit about, but I see it, and hear it. So yeah, it's interesting. And you also see it with women, like in America, it seems like, if you're over 30 and you're a dude, or 35 or whatever, and you're a dude and you express anything sexual, you're a creep. And women, you're like what, a cougar or a MILF, or like, you're dismissed in some way, or you're just fucking invisible. Yeah. Whereas in Europe, you walk down the street, because they're, even though Spain, for example, is officially a Catholic country, they're much more chill about sex than Americans are. And so you walk down the street.
I agree, yeah.
You walk down the street in Spain, and there are women like in their 70s who are walking down the street, and they're like, hell yeah.
Yeah, totally.
They're like really into being women, and they feel hot and they look hot and they're putting out energy, and it's like, damn, you people know how to live.
Yeah. No, that's really well said. And I have noticed that in Latin countries, they do feel more sexually liberated, sexually free. And there's just kind of that swing in the step. And maybe it's something as simple as it's just hot, so people wear less clothes. So it just hasn't been as big of a thing. I don't know. I mean, you know what's going on. Because
Paris is that way, dude. And it snows in Paris. It's, I think it's cultural. I don't think it's weather.
One of the greatest things I've ever heard you say was kind of on this topic of sexuality and being cautious around the topic because you don't want to sound like a creep, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you were on Joe Rogan's podcast. It was probably in the heat of like the Me Too movement, and how somebody can just take something and just run with it and spread the word. And you said something like, so you have to like set expectations and prep people. And I would like to tell the world right now, that I am a creep. I just thought that was so funny.
Well, I'm like the only person who hasn't been Me Too'd, you know? Like, I think anyone who's considered it is like, it's not worth the trouble. But also, like, when for in all seriousness, like, I think when you're, like, very transparent about things, it's much harder to hurt people. So, for a long time, I've been sort of openly what I am, non-monogamous, creepy, like whatever adjective you want to pick. But that stops me from getting into relationships with people who have expectations that they're projecting onto me that don't map with who I actually am, because I'm really clear about who I am. So, there was a long period in my life where I was like, look, I'm not going to be anyone's boyfriend. Just not going to happen. And so the first conversation I would have with women was like, oh, here's my deal. I'm not going to be your boyfriend. I could be your friend and we could have a sexual relationship, but I will never, ever be your boyfriend. And, I thought that was going to eliminate my sexual life, because I thought, like, no woman's going to accept those terms. But what ended up happening was about half the women were like, okay, I'm out. I don't give a shit because I'm looking for a boyfriend. Yep. But thanks for being honest with me, which was great. And the other half of the women were like, oh, cool, because I don't want a boyfriend and I want a guy who's honest, and you're obviously honest, so let's hang out. So it sort of opened up the world in a way. I thought it was going to close all the doors, and suddenly all these doors were opening. It was interesting.
Yeah, no, it was very well said. And I mean, the podcast movement in itself has just been such a beautiful catalyst for transparent honesty, because you could never get this from mainstream media or even TV or cable TV or even satellite TV. And now you get, you go straight to the source with no fuckery and no filtering. And even doing this podcast, it's been unbelievable therapy just for me, and like being like telling things that I never thought I'd have the guts to say. And not only does it feel amazing, but people have messaged me quite a few times saying how useful it is. It's like, oh shit, I had the same problem. I didn't know I was allowed to talk about that. Right. And it's a nice two-way street. And the pod has just been just blown my mind as to what it's capable of therapeutically.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. You forget that there are a whole bunch of people on the other side of that. You know, you're sitting alone with a microphone and a beer and you're just like rambling. And then, I remember the first time I was on Rogan's podcast, I told some story about how when I was a kid, my kung fu teacher had killed his father. And, this was a long time ago in Western Pennsylvania. I was like 14 or 15 or something. And, because Joe and I were talking about martial arts, it was like one of the things we had in common, I guess. And
this guy killed his dad with kung fu?
Okay. Yeah. He and his dad got into some epic kung fu fight and with samurai swords and shit. Anyway, I told Joe the story, and then like a week later, I got an email from this guy saying, hey, I heard you on Rogan talking about this case. I was the prosecuting attorney for that case. And, I can tell you some of the things that you didn't know about what happened and, because then my family moved shortly after that happened. So I never really knew, did the guy go to prison or get off in self-defense? Anyway, the point is, like, Jesus, you're talking to a lot of people when you're hanging out with Rogan. Yeah. And it feels like you're just hanging out with Rogan, but like, you better not bullshit, because like if I had told some lie, there would have been people like, hey, wait a minute, I was the attorney and I was the judge and you're full of shit. It's like, man, you forget, because it's such an intimate thing. Like here you and I are, you're sitting in your living room or something. I see your curtains and your art, and I'm in my place. And so we're both like comfortable, We're not in a TV studio. You're not reminded that there's an audience because you don't hear them or see them.
Yeah, totally. You feel safe. Maybe you're not.
Yeah.
I honestly have nightmares about being on Joe Rogan's show, and I'll wake up in a sweat like that I'm bombing on Rogan. I'm like, fuck.
Oh, dude, I've bombed on Rogan so many times. Every time I feel like I'm bombing because you're with Rogan, you're with this. First time I was on was the worst, though. I don't know. You've probably heard me tell that story, but
I think so. Yeah.
He got me high.
Right. Yeah.
And I was so high I couldn't think, much less talk.
But you keep getting asked back. I feel like I've heard most of your Rogan, and I feel like you've pretty much delivered. I mean, you keep going back on the show, so that's cool. So you do have some anxiety when you go on Rogan, maybe.
Well, if I get high, I do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't get high anymore when I go on his show. I'll get high with him after. But last thing I want is to be stoned and start having that meta level of like, oh my God, thinking about the conversation, but also everything else that's going on.
Yeah. The cannabis is, I think it's just one of those things for most people where you, nice shirt. What does it say? Don't listen to Brett Newski. That is an honor.
You can probably see my nipples.
Nipping. I lost my train of thought after looking at your nipples. What were we talking about?
That'll happen. Going on Rogan's show.
Yeah, the cannabis. It's just such a sensitive thing. I always, other songwriters always told me like you gotta, try to write a song sober, and then the next time try to write one after you smoke a joint. And I feel like I'm batting like 10% on the being creative while on cannabis. It just hasn't been happening, but. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you gotta, pick your battles. I find for me being high is conducive to a certain kind of creativity, like, making connections, think of a metaphor, imagery, things like that, but certainly not for sitting down and actually writing or editing.
Yeah. I found it works really well on the musical end, like creatively, guitar, riffs, melody, but lyrically it just never worked.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Is there is there anything you do as a creative spark, substance-wise? You eat a brick of dark chocolate or drink a beer, or you just kind of take things as it comes along?
Well, I guess it depends what I'm trying to create. But generally, a glass of wine or a beer just to, reduce the super ego or the, controlling consciousness and allow the spontaneity a little more space.
Yeah.
I don't, I used to do all these, on my podcast, I have these sort of subgenres, like the Toma, which is talking out my ass, where I found that when I was doing interviews with people, I would talk too much. And it's like, you and I would be talking and I'd launch into some story about the scorpion that stung me in Guatemala or something. And it was like, fuck, it felt disrespectful to my guests that I'm talking too much. So then I set aside this thing where I would just,
oh, bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
I would tell those stories specifically. And then the Roma is where I just rant out my ass about whatever's going on, to just sort of keep those out of the conversation podcasts. But I used to do those when I was living alone. It was really nice because, I'd sort of spend a few days by myself and feel like talking with someone, and I'd sit down and have a beer and do those. And I really felt the presence of the audience in that sense, as like a friend that you're hanging out with.
Right.
But when I'm living with other people, I don't have as much of that consciousness,
Yeah. I've tried to do a few solo episodes. That's just such a different beast. And it's you can either do it and I hit a zone and run with it, or I just bomb and I just don't release it. But I really do enjoy your Roma episodes. I think those are quality. What was was there a catalyst for you where you first discovered traveling and you first discovered you could do it on the cheap and it was doable?
Well, the first real trip I did was that trip I mentioned earlier to Alaska, where I hitchhiked from New York to Alaska and back. And then I did it again the next year. And, that was cheap because I was hitchhiking and I was sleeping in my tent most of the time. I never stayed in a hotel or a motel or anything. And that was really enlightening in the sense that I met people and had experiences that I couldn't have imagined or anticipated. And that really, that struck me and that changed my life in deep ways. And then, I after college, I got a job in New York City. I worked there for a couple of years, and then I took off and went to India and traveled in Asia for a couple of years. And that was just so awesome and fulfilling. And the key there was that I had a certain amount of money. I wasn't limited by time. I was limited by money. And so the longer I could make the money last, the longer the trip would last, So that was the incentive to keep it cheap. And also just the way I like traveling, I don't like, I'm not like going to stay in some fucking luxury hotel or something. That's not what I'm looking for.
Sure, yeah. I think that, growing up, I never knew anybody in my circles who traveled until one of my buddies, Johnny Cronenwetter, who I think he was like an assistant pilot on Air Force One a couple years ago now at this point. Smart guy. But he was in the Air Force and he was like, yeah, we went around the world in, 3 months and we spent like $7 a day or something. And then I was like, oh, I thought traveling costed like your whole bank account and more. I didn't know it was actually a possible thing you could do. And then once I started doing research and asking around, then, you get into the Lonely Planet, shoestring budget travel books, and the world just kind of opens up. And I'll never forget like the first time traveling out of the country by myself. I went to visit some friends who were on a nursing program in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And, you get in to the tiny, skinny little roads, and there's people's laundry hanging over the balcony, and it just, the size and the scope and the intensity and the wild west of it all. I was terrified. I was like, oh, there's a garbage fire on the side of the road. And but the freedom of that feeling, and especially doing a lot of that travel solo, I just really hope everybody gets to experience that freedom feeling and the fear that comes with it, even if it's just like a road trip by yourself for a couple days,
Yeah, well, circling back to our conversation about anxiety, I think that one of the things that's awesome about travel is that you are anxious, especially, early on, but even later when you're going to a new place. You don't know what you're going to find there, and so you sort of imagine the worst and maybe prepare for the worst in some sense. And then you get there and you have a good time and people are really nice to you and everything works out. And, there's this lesson of like, oh, things are much better than I've been told. Things are much safer than I've been told, Like I like everyone else in America, I was always told like India was super dangerous and dirty and you're going to get drugged and robbed and, you're going to like shit your brains out and you're going to like, everything's going to be horrible. Why would anyone ever go there? And I went there and it was awesome. It was beautiful. There were difficult things about it, but nobody hurt me. In fact, people helped me and protected me and took care of me and, sort of went out of their way to be generous to me. And it really felt like, that's a lesson that you can apply in life, in other things, that things are going to be better than you think. The first time I went out of the U.S., actually, I was still in college. I went to Mexico and I didn't speak Spanish. I had never been to Mexico. And I was fucking paranoid. I had this, I made a weapon. I took a Kung Fu star, the stars you throw that like,
yeah.
And I drilled a hole in it and got like a fake gold chain, and I weakened the last link so that I could like pull the star, and then I'd have it on a chain and I could swing it like nunchucks.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
And nobody would get within, 5 feet of me because I just slice their face with this Kung Fu star. And I wore it as a pendant when I went to Mexico, and I was like, okay, I'm ready. Anyone fucks with me, I'm ready. This is before like Narcos and, the drugs, the shit and all that. And I was there for like, I don't know, a week when I realized like, this is ridiculous, man. Like I'm walking around. These people are really nice to me. Nobody's fucking with me. This is, know. And I ended up meeting these dudes, and I gave it to them as a gift. It's a long story, but I ended up like teaching self-defense to these land reform peasants in Chiapas. I lived there with them for a while and turned into this whole thing. And I gave them this Kung Fu star.
That's a beautiful
and they were
thing.
laughing. And then I met them years later. Totally different story. I was in a different part of Mexico, like 5 or 6 years later. I happened to meet these guys on the street. And I was like, yo, hey, Angel was the guy's name. I was like, Angel, what's up, man? And he was like, who the fuck are you? And there was this other guy with him, Rafael. And Rafa recognized me. And Rafa said to Angel, and at this point I spoke Spanish, so I understood, but Rafa said to Angel, it's the CIA agent, remember? And I was like, what? So that was their nickname for me. I was the CIA agent because I had this fucking weird, Kung Fu star weapon.
It's a sweet nickname. I would love to call you that for the rest of the episode. It is crazy. I remember backpacking around Colombia on a budget trip, and I met this guy, Small Papa Luke, they called him. And he was like this American guy who had like been posted up there for 2 months writing a book or something. And I didn't know anything. It was like my second time out of the country, but Small Papa Luke, he would like show me around, and he kind of gave me the ropes. We became pretty good pals, as much as you can become pals in like the span of 3 days. But later in my life, I moved and lived in Saigon, Vietnam for 2 years. And I'd been there a while. I was making a good living, and I was motorbiking around the city, and I was driving down the road, and I was like, that guy looks familiar. And I get in front of him, and it's Small Papa Luke in Vietnam. And I'm like, what are you doing in Nam? He's like, oh, Newski, what's going on? He's like, I moved here. I'm going to finish the book here. And so we became best pals then in Vietnam, on another continent, like 5 years later. And
that's awesome.
I still keep in touch with him a little bit. It's a weird world, Chris Ryan. I mean,
it
the
is,
CIA
man.
agent.
It is. And the more you open up to it through travel, the more weird stuff happens. I mean, I had that same kind of experience. I knew this woman in Alaska when I was up there working in the cannery. And then a couple of years later, I was in the East Village having brunch at this place near Tompkins Square Park. And she walked past my table. And I was like, hey, I know you. Remember from Alaska? Oh, yeah. And then like 3 years after that, I was walking down an alley in Bangkok trying to find this guest house where my buddy was staying. And there she was walking down the street. Like
Gives me the chills, man. Well, there's this like global underground community of like people are just addicted to the route or the travel circuit, and it's crazy how small it makes the world. And it's like Facebook's been nice for that. It's like if I have a tour in Japan, you can type in that little top bar friends who live in Japan, and then I'm like, holy shit, I didn't know Julia Fernandez lived in Japan. Then we'll go out for lunch or whatever, and she'll bring a couple buddies to the show. But I remember from those like early days of traveling and not knowing anyone how lonely and weird it could get. And I almost never feel that like abyss of supreme loneliness and lack of information as I did in the early days, because there's always someone you can call. And now even if you don't know anybody, there's like the forums and the couch surfing. It's a pretty neat thing.
It's kind of a shame though. I mean, I don't know. This is a perennial issue in travel. It's like because I started international travel. I was in India in 88, 89, something like that. Whenever Chernobyl blew up, I remember I was in India then, whenever that was. But there was no internet, so you couldn't email your buddy or text somebody or check your Facebook forum. Like I was in Kashmir, dude, then there was probably nobody in the world who knew where I was within 1,000 miles,
Sure.
And that was lonely as shit, but it was also really interesting to have that experience, and I remember writing letters to this woman that I was seeing. She was in New York. I'd write her a letter and send it to her and figure, okay, it's going to take a month for the letter to get there. It's going to take her a week to write back to me. And then a month for her letter to get to me. So in my letter, I had to tell her where to send her response, which means I had to figure out, like, okay, let's see, in about 2.5 months, I'll be in Calcutta. So send your letter to Calcutta,
Right.
It's like those days are so far gone.
Yep. I can see where there would be a serious romanticism to that. And I can, in a sense, a little bit relate, because there was when I lived in Asia, there was no smartphones. I had like a drug dealer burner phone and no Wi-Fi on your phone. It was all like modem dial-up internet cafes, which those were pretty exciting, because you would go in and there'd be a weird guy with dreadlocks, or you'd buy like an hour from him, and then you go online, maybe drink a coffee with the nutcase next to you. And I remember meeting a few pretty cool people in those crusty internet cafes, but those have to be toast at this point. But I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's all, the trajectory, all this technology is just separating us from each other. It says it's connecting us, but it's connecting us the way you and I are connected right now, sitting in 2 rooms, thousands of miles away from each other, looking at a screen, right?
Yep.
We're not in internet cafes or waiting in line at the post office to get a letter that was written a month ago. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it's very different.
Do you see a pushback to that coming? I mean, I do feel maybe we're on some sort of wave where people are wising up to social media a little bit and possibly distancing themselves from it a little more. But I feel like, the next group of young chaps there's going to be some sort of like anti-online movement or something. I don't know. What do you think?
I think a lot of it depends on what happens. We're in the middle of a meltdown right now, and we don't know how it's going to play out, right? So if the world economy rebounds after, everyone gets vaccinated or dies or whatever is going to happen, and we keep going in the current direction, then I think it's going to keep getting worse. And Japan is sort of furthest down the road, I think, at this point. I've never been to Japan, so you probably have more insights into this, but it seems like they're much more sort of technologically dominated than even the U.S. And what, you see breakdown in, all these people like live in their bedrooms and refuse to come out, and nobody apparently they're not having sex anymore. Yeah. It's like interacting with other animal humans in the 3D dimensional world is just out of the question. So, it could definitely, we could be sliding into a Black Mirror episode for sure.
Right, yeah.
But I think there's also a pretty strong possibility that what we're in the midst of right now is going to result in a major reconfiguration of the way we live in the West. I think it's like if you're in a bad relationship but you don't want to leave because, you're in it and it would be a big hassle to leave.
Sure.
You'd have to sell your house.
Everyone's been there, I feel.
Yeah, But if your partner dumps you, then suddenly it's like a liberation. It's like, okay, I didn't have the balls to end this myself, but I was kind of hoping it would end, and now you've done me a favor. And I'm all pissed off and I'm bitter, but deep down inside, I'm really glad.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like maybe that could be what's happening right now, that, the American dream is being revealed to be inaccessible. And this relationship that we have with consumerism and capitalism and technology, it's like it's being revealed to be empty and pathological and toxic. And it's almost like it's dumping us.
Yeah.
And so we need to think about how are we going to recover from this? And I think what a lot of people are thinking is, you know what? I don't want that job anyway, the one I got fired from. I hated it. I don't really want to live in LA. Why was I living in LA? I was living in LA because I thought I was going to be an actor 10 years ago, and that didn't work out. And now I've got this job in a restaurant and I make decent money and I have some friends, but I fucking hate it here. And now I can't afford it. So now what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. And so I think people are starting to, understand that this technology can be used as opposed to getting used by it. And so if we use it, we can use it to live our lives in ways that are much richer and require much less money.
Yeah. It's just like any I always see it as just like any other drug, You don't want to drink too much booze. You don't want to smoke too much chronic because it's just going to wobble out your equilibrium. And that's always been the case with me and social media, is like through my 20s, myself as well as probably everyone I knew had no concept of really how to use the internet efficiently without having 20 screens open at once and doing it well. So my anxiety was always through the roof. But now that I kind of see how it operates and how SEO works and become aware of advertising, you can push back at it finally, which is a good feeling. Because I'll go do 3-4 days in the woods with no internet, and I never come back feeling like I really missed anything.
Right.
I don't fall too behind on anything. So it's I don't know, maybe International No Internet Day, just to give everybody a barometer again for what that's even like. I don't know.
Yeah, and also the way we configure our lives in terms of consumption. Like I'm in this tiny little town in Colorado, and lots of people are moving here. And 10 years ago, there was nobody here, and now suddenly, all these people who are realizing like, oh, I can work remotely, and I can sell my house or stop paying this crazy rent in Dallas or Denver or LA or whatever, and I can move to a tiny little town and rent a 4-bedroom house for the same price, or design and build my own place, or I can like live with my friends and we can all share a couple of cars and a washing machine and take turns cooking, and like, wow, this is awesome because I'm with people. Everyone misses being in college, like in the dorm where you'd come back and hang out and you meet your roommates' friends, and and everyone says like, oh, it's hard to make friends when you get older because you whatever. It's because of the way we structure our lives. I'm making new friends all the time. I'm 58 years old. It's like, it's not about your age. It's about how you structure your life. Right. If you got new people coming into your world, it's awesome, especially if they're pre-filtered by a podcast or by travel or something, so you have shared interests,
I love the idea of the rise of the small town being a thing again, and it seems like you're very, very much all about that. And I've said this before, I think, on the pod, but I think that could be really great for the arts and the culture, having all the talent from an LA or a New York dispersed into all these smaller cities. I know from a musician's perspective, when we tour, like going to play in Chicago or New York fucking sucks. It's like you don't know where you're going to park. You're going to get a parking ticket. You might get robbed. I mean, my shit got stolen in Chicago. There's so much competition, so you make like 10% of what you would make in like maybe a smaller market. But when we go to some of these smaller cities or smaller music festivals, everybody's amped. You got a place to park. There's community. You feel like you slip right into the community, and you go back a year and a half later, and you still remember a lot of those people, and they remember you, and you're all of a sudden a part of their ecosystem.
Right.
And I just don't see. I don't know if I see a lot of sustainability in living in a massive city, as much as I love a big, smelly city once in a while.
Yeah, I hear you. And I don't know what it's like from the musician's perspective, but from my perspective, there's some exceptions, but I would say that generally my enjoyment of a musical experience is inversely proportional to the size of the audience.
Right.
Right. So when I'm seeing, Bruce Springsteen in a stadium with 100,000 people, it's like, hey, you put on a hell of a show, dude. But, I was standing in puke and, like a mile away.
Yeah.
Whereas when I'm on a beach in Thailand and some dude pulls out his guitar and starts playing and he's surprisingly good, and then somebody says, hey, I've got some bongos in my bungalow, and they go get their bongos, and there's a bonfire and there's some sexy chicks dancing by the fire and everybody's passing a joint around, that's like, for me, that's as good as it gets musically.
Big time, yeah.
I mean, Bruce is amazing, or Red Hot Chili Peppers, I've seen them in concerts, and they're fucking amazing, but I've got them on my phone. I put on some headphones and listen, and that's the peak experience of Red Hot Chili Peppers. The only way it could be better is if they were by the fire in Thailand,
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like maybe the common citizen doesn't know about that underground small concert level, and I didn't know about it until like I could drive a car. I would only know about the amphitheater shows, but when I discovered these tiny club shows, like, holy shit, you can be like 10 feet from the lead guitar player and see it all go down. And I think a lot of these cats that maybe the only show they go to all year is to see the Foo Fighters in front of 40,000 people. That's awesome and that's a thrill. But if I could just take a few of these folks to some of these tiny little intimate shows or a house concert, I think it would just blow their minds, and they would see live music and live performance in a completely different setting, and it'd feel really good. And it feels amazing to be part of a smaller artist's like ecosystem where you get to know them. And every time we go play in Door County, there's this guy Johnny Chicago who comes to the shows, and he gets kicked out of every other show I play up here just because he's either lights up a joint in the club or he's just a crazy dude. But we always know Johnny Chicago is going to be there in Door County, but he might be watching the show from the bushes off the venue property. But
you got to get him a backstage pass, man. Make him a roadie.
Oh, yeah. He might be a liability in the van. That's the only thing. There are so many guys I'd love to bring on tour.
Intimacy is such an important part of music, and the connection between the artist and the audience. It's hard for it to be intimate when there are 40,000 people there, but when there are 50 people there or 100 people there, I think it's much easier. When it's a huge audience, I think you need to create the illusion of intimacy, which some artists are really good at doing. Mm-hmm. But when it's 100 people, it doesn't need to be illusion. It's real. You're actually. I had this friend of mine. You do know who Pat Metheny is?
I don't know him. Yeah,
he's a phenomenal jazz guitarist.
Okay.
Really, like one of the greatest guitarists alive. And he was on tour in Spain, and normally he would play to 5,000 to 10,000 person audience. And whoever booked his tour in Spain really fucked up because they booked him to play in that kind of a venue the night that Barcelona was playing Real Madrid in soccer, it's called El Clásico. It's like the most watched sporting event in the world. It's massive. So he went to play this concert, and my friend was there. And she said, it was like, 5,000 seat auditorium, and there were like 300 people there. And it's Pat Metheny with his band. He's got all these, world famous musicians, in the jazz world. And she was feeling so bad, like he's going to be humiliated. He's going to think Spanish people don't like jazz or whatever. Like this is going to be, she's cringing. And finally, they come out on stage and Pat says, listen, it's been explained to us that there was this big sporting event tonight. And so people didn't come as we were expecting. Yeah. But I have to say, it feels really ridiculous for us to be up on the stage, with 300 people here in this big room. How would you feel if we just sort of moved the chairs and we all sat on the floor and we just played acoustic? And everyone was like, fuck yeah.
Yeah. That's
so
cool.
They all got up and they moved their chairs and they unplugged their instruments or whatever and came down. And they just had this, like a house party.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, baby.
And she said it was the best experience she's ever had in any, It's like, yeah, man.
The improvisation of it too. And I mean, just this weekend, 2 nights ago, I was up in the woods camping and we had 5 people sit in a circle and just pass guitars and, passing a doobie, having a beer. And before we know it, we're like debating the power hierarchy of Russia. We're like, is Putin, was Gorbachev before Putin? He's like, no, that was that Mark. I can't remember who was after. Was he post Gorbachev? And then my buddy Scotty goes, play a song called Post Gorbachev Blues. And I just kick into this piece of shit song. Have you heard the news? I got the post Gorbachev blues. And it went on for like 5 minutes, but I found some sort of weird zone where I was hitting all the rhymes, pulling shit out of my ass. And everyone in the room is just crying, laughing, just dying. And I'm like trying to hold it together to finish the song. It's either the best song ever made or it's probably the worst. But after we finished that and everyone wiped the tears out of their eyes, Scotty was like, he goes, it was one of the highest compliments I ever heard as a musician. He goes, I don't think there was anyone on this entire planet doing anything better than what we were doing in those 3 minutes. And I was just like, yes, it might have been the highlight of my musical life, more so even than like opening for Violent Femmes or something,
Or getting kicked out of Walmart.
Yeah. All right. You're following my career trajectory, Chris Ryan. Well, on that note, that's probably a good wrap up spot. We've been riffing a good while. It's been cool to riff in real life. Well, I guess sort of real life.
Yeah, real time anyway. So I forget, what is the theme of this podcast? Is there a theme?
Dirt from the road. So it's a lot of road stories, travel stories, weird stuff that happens on the road.
That's right.
We usually dive into mental health a little bit. It's usually musicians and comedians, and I think you're the first author. So it's been an honor.
Wow. Okay.
So I'm gonna hit stop here. I'll see you next time in Colorado. It's you're a good man, Chris Ryan. I love you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, brother.